Alright, welcome to the Strange North channel. In this video, I'm going to give you the top 6 cryptid legends from the province of Quebec. This is also my first video featuring that province, so bonjour Quebec, although this video will be in English. And so this is my list of the top 6 cryptid legends from within that province. And there are definitely other cryptid legends within Quebec that I didn't get to in this video, and I may do a part 2 video down the road. I just hope this video provides a good starting point for learning about this topic. And you probably know this, but in case you don't, a cryptid is just a creature of legend whose existence has not yet been proven. And there's definitely a lot of debate and controversy surrounding this topic. But I find that no matter where you fall on the spectrum of belief, it can be interesting to look at cryptid legends because it helps you learn a lot more about an area's history and mythology, and I find that interesting. And I'm also going to point you towards other people and organizations that have done really excellent work in doing research on cryptid legends within Canada. And this intro has been long enough, so I'm going to jump right into the list, and at number 1 is the Lackwood Screecher. So Lackwood is a tiny lake in Quebec about 5.5 hours north of Montreal. And the Lackwood Screecher even has its own entry on the popular Cryptid wiki. Apparently this creature has never actually been seen, it's only been heard, and those who have heard it say it's absolutely bone-chilling. Apparently being close to the creature can cause a painful throbbing sensation in the head, nosebleeds, nausea, and vomiting. And according to the legend, this creature leaves behind hair and dandruff that, if it comes into contact with exposed skin, can cause irritation, rash, blistering, and even peeling. In extreme cases, it can cause large amounts of skin to peel, causing profuse bleeding and scarring. And like I mentioned, this creature has never been seen before, but people around the area of this lake report hearing this strange sound, and this is attributed to the Lackwood Screecher. And so when you're talking about cryptid legends within Quebec, you've got to mention this one. Okay, at number 2 is the Ashwaps, and this is a creature that has been reportedly seen in Lac Saint Jean, and it's named after the Ashwapmishin River, which flows into this lake. Indigenous people in the area prior to European settlement had a legend of a lake monster, and they claimed that its lair was located on Grass Snake Island, which is a small island within this lake. After European settlement, reports of this creature started in the 1950s, and people talked about seeing a long bluish-black serpent-like creature up to 60 feet long. There's a well-known encounter that happened in 1978 in which Marcel Tardif and his wife saw this creature while out on the water near Scott Point. They estimated this thing was between 50 and 60 feet long, and it would raise up out of the water and then submerge back into the water multiple times. That same day, a First Nations family was out on the lake and they were thrown into the water after a large creature slammed into the bottom of their canoe. I also found a cool write-up on the Ashwaps on the Pine Barrens Institute website. This is a fantastic resource for learning about cryptid legends, and I definitely recommend it. On July 23rd of 1955, the first ever swimming competition to cross Lac Saint Jean was held, and this is now an annual event that attracts swimmers from across the world. Interestingly, in 1955, the first year this competition was held, there's a rumor that swimmers were encouraged to sign a waiver that stated if they encounter or are injured by the Ashwaps, they will not take legal action against the race organizers. Sightings of the Ashwaps continued into the 1980s and then tapered off in the 90s, and there have been very few modern sightings. However, this legend remains very strong in the area of this lake, and so the Ashwaps is definitely one of the top cryptids of Quebec. Okay, at number 3 is the Loup-Garou. Now, this creature is sometimes called a Loup-Garou, and this is essentially a legendary creature in French communities, very much like a traditional werewolf. Sometimes it's also referred to as a lycanthrope. I also wanted to mention another fantastic resource for learning about interesting Canadian legends, and that's Canadiana. These guys produce award-winning documentaries on all sorts of interesting stories from throughout the country's history, and I would definitely recommend checking them out. And they do an interesting write-up on the Loup-Garou. So prior to French settlement in Canada, the country of France had a tradition of werewolf lore going back to the late 1400s. People suspected of being werewolves were regularly tried, convicted, and burned at the stake, similar to what was happening with suspected witches. And of course, Quebec used to be called New France, and there have been sightings of werewolves in New France since the 1600s. The Loup-Garou was often thought to be a man that was cursed for some sort of transgression against God or man. In French Canadian folklore, folklore, a person could be cursed into becoming a Loup-Garou by not being a good Christian. For example, people who didn't confess on Easter could be cursed into turning into a werewolf. The spell could last as long as 101 days, and every evening the cursed individual would transform into an animal and wander the countryside in animal form. This spell could be broken if someone recognized the person while they were transformed and could draw blood from this animal. And so there were these stories of people in the colony of New France seeing this Loup-Garou throughout the area. And then in 1766, the Gazette de Quebec reported that a werewolf had been seen in the colony of New France outside the walls of Quebec City, and apparently it was disguised as a beggar in order to fool people and attack them. The Gazette mentioned that the Loup-Garou might be as dangerous as the Beast of Gavardon. I hope I'm saying that right. And this was a wolf-like creature that had been terrorizing France between 1764 and 1767. So right around the same time that these sightings had been happening in New France. And then the following year in 1967, the Gazette again talked about how the inhabitants of New France fought against this werewolf, and they used their dogs to attack the Loup-Garou until they seriously injured it. This is a quote from a Gazette article from November 3rd of 1767. Quote, "He received such a furious blow that it was thought that they were entirely delivered from this fatal animal, as it soon time after retired to its hole to the great satisfaction of the public." But later that year, in December of 1767, the Gazette reported that the werewolf was back. Quote, "This beast is not entirely destroyed, but begins to show itself more furious than ever. Beware then of the wiles of this malicious beast, and take good care of falling into its claws." Apparently this was the last mention of this beast in the Gazette, and reports of the Loup-Garou started to taper off. And then over time, many people have drawn parallels between the Loup-Garou and the Dogman. The Dogman is another cryptid that has been seen across North America, and it's very similar to the werewolf legends. And of course you have the popular Dogman of Michigan that started in the 1700s in Wexford County, Michigan. And many people think that that creature is the same one that was seen in the province of Quebec. However, in Quebec, the Loup-Garou is mostly considered to be a legend of the past, but to this day, this creature remains a very popular cryptid legend within Quebec folklore. Okay, at number 4 is the Mugwump. This is a legendary lake creature of Lake Timiskaming on the border of Ontario and Quebec. The word Mugwump comes from the Algonquin language, and its meaning is unclear, but reports of a lake creature go back to the First Nations people living in the area of this lake. In an 1879 canoe voyage across Lake Timiskaming, a French-Canadian voyageur described how his Anishinaabe guides made offerings of tobacco at sites like Devil's Rock to an otherworldly creature living in this lake. In the 19th century, European traders and settlers would often hear unexplained noises while they were out on the water. There are stories from the 1920s to the 1930s of people collecting saucer-sized objects that were thought to be Mugwump scales. The first written documentation regarding this creature was in 1979. In a North Bay Nugget article on April 20th of that year, a man named Jack Dent claimed that he had been made aware of this creature in the late 1960s, and that this creature could really boost the town's tourism industry. A couple weeks later, journalist Mike Pearson published an account of Chuck Cool's early 1960s encounter with the Mugwump in 2 articles in the Timiskaming Speaker, and this sparked a local obsession with this monster that would last for years. There were regular sightings reported through the 1980s, particularly on the eastern side of the lake around Ville-Marie, Quebec. And sightings would eventually decrease over time. I've mentioned this guy before on other cryptid videos, but if you haven't heard of him, Hammerson Peters is an excellent resource for learning about cryptid legends within Canada. And he just has a plethora of really interesting videos on his YouTube channel, so I definitely recommend checking him out if you want more information on these cryptid legends. At any rate, the Mugwump remains a very strong cryptid legend within Quebec, and it definitely deserves a mention on this list. Okay, at number 5 is the Memphre, and this is another legendary lake monster living in Lake Memphre-Magog. Now, this is a freshwater glacial lake, and it's right on the border between Canada and the US, right in between Newport, Vermont, and Magog, Quebec. It's described as being very much like the Loch Ness Monster with a long body and neck, and many people describe it as having a horse-like head. The first known sighting of this creature by European settlers was in 1816. Apparently a man named Mr. Barry and his wife saw a creature in the lake that looked something like a skinned sheep with 12 to 15 pairs of legs. In 1935, scuba diver Max Lubker was searching the lake for a drowning victim's body, and he said that he saw strange eels that were about 6 to 8 feet long and as thick as a man's thigh. And there were many more sightings of this creature throughout the years. In 1997, the University of Sherbrooke released data by Sonia Baldock stating that there had been 215 well-documented sightings of Memphre in this lake. In June of 2000, multiple witnesses in Sergeant's Bay saw a horse-headed creature that they estimated was 75 feet long, which is pretty huge. Interestingly, Lake Memphre is often the site of quarterly and annual meetings of the International Society of Cryptozoological Researchers. And there's a competition in this lake called In Search of Memphre, and it's a 25-mile international cross-border marathon swimming event that's held on Lake Memphre every year. Apparently the Memphre was last spotted in 2005, but this is such a strong legend in Quebec that in 2011 the Memphre was featured on a colored Canadian quarter. And interestingly, the Memphre also figures into Vermont folklore on the other side of the border, as this lake sits between the two countries. And so when you're talking about cryptid legends within the province of Quebec, the Memphre definitely deserves a spot on this list. Okay, and at number 6 is the Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Obviously this creature is more strongly associated with the Pacific Northwest, but enthusiasts are well aware that the Bigfoot has been reportedly seen and encountered across North America, and it's also a major part of First Nations folklore across Canada. There's a group called the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, and they compile encounters from across North America. On their site, they list 4 encounters with Bigfoot, interestingly between 2002 and 2004, although these stories are of people hearing vocalizations or finding footprints, and there are no official sightings listed on this site. There's another group called Sasquatch Canada, and on their site they list 2 reports of people that actually saw Bigfoot within the province of Quebec. There was a well-known Bigfoot encounter that happened in Quebec in 2012. In September of that year, language teacher Maggie Crickshank said she saw Bigfoot while berry picking with her cousin. She took pictures of the footprints that they found and posted them to her Facebook account. Apparently this happened just outside of Akulavik, which is a small Inuit community in northwest Quebec. Maggie also claimed to have a video of her encounter, but she never publicly released this. And then the next year, in August of 2013, a hunter in the Cree village of Wamingji in northern Quebec said he saw a pair of red-eyed beasts staring at him in the forest as he drove his truck through a wooded area outside of town. He then returned to this area the next day and took pictures of big footprints he found in the moss. And this story was also very well publicized within Quebec and across Canada. And there are also a couple of different online maps where people compile reported Bigfoot encounters across North America, and these maps show multiple encounters in Quebec, particularly in the far north and then in the southwest, sort of close to the Quebec-Ontario border. And then going through the Quebec newspaper archives, prior to the year 2000, I couldn't find any reported encounters with this cryptid within the province. But I did find a bunch of articles talking about Bigfoot encounters and research across North America. And so it seems like there had been a fair amount of interest in this cryptid within the province of Quebec going back many decades. And again, the Bigfoot is definitely most strongly associated with the western portion of North America, but this creature has reportedly been spotted across Canada. And so I think it's fair to say that the Bigfoot deserves a mention when you're talking about cryptid legends within Quebec. Okay, and that pretty much wraps up the video. I find these cryptid stories interesting, and it's fascinating to me how many different legends there are across Canada. And like I mentioned, there are a couple other Quebec cryptid legends that I didn't get to in this video, and I may do a part 2 down the road. At any rate, if you watched this far, thank you very much. I hope you found that interesting and informative, and if you'd like to watch more of my content in general, please consider subscribing to my channel. I upload at least 1 new video per week. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you next time on the Strange North channel.